Hi there, it's Sasha Townsend again. This is the second video in a series of videos on lessons from standards-based grading. There are lessons that standards-based grading can teach us. In the first video, we talked about standards-based grading and what it is. And here's the short version. Standards-based grading involves taking your course content and splitting it up into lots of little pieces called standards. In a math course, it's mathematical concepts and techniques that are grouped together, and each grouping, each topic is called a course standard. So rather than giving 4 exam grades, I would give between 25 and 30 individual course standards grades. And what makes standards-based grading is that after we've broken all of this into little pieces, we give the students opportunities to earn new grades on those standards. So they earn a grade on a standard, it tells them how they're doing on that standard right now, and then they have opportunities to what we call reassess over that standard. So you can have an assessment where you get your first grade, and then you can have a reassessment where you can get your second grade, and the second grade writes over the first grade. The most recent grade stands generally, and then those are averaged to compute your grade in the class. If you'd like more details about how standards-based grading works, especially how it works well and why it works well in the face-to-face environment especially, I highly recommend that you watch that video. It's a little long. You can watch it at twice the speed if you want to. I won't be offended. But that will tell you how I implemented standards-based grading in a face-to-face environment at TCC from 2016 to the beginning of spring 2020. Now, this video is about how everything changed after the pandemic. So before the pandemic, I did not use standards-based grading in any of my online courses or any of my pre-calculus or essentials for pre-calculus courses at TCC. But after the pandemic, I had to pivot to online standards-based grading for those students that I promised standards-based grading at the beginning of spring 2020. So that's what this video is about. So here's some background. First of all, in spring 2020, I was scheduled to teach 5 classes. I was teaching 2 of them online without standards-based grading. So we're using a traditional structure. Because they're online classes, they were given online homework and paper-based tests. In Calculus 2, I was giving my students paper-based tests that were similar to the paper-based tests that I gave, or paper-based quizzes that I gave in my standards-based grading courses. So I was already trying to align the experience of my online students with my face-to-face students, although I was not breaking the content into the same number of pieces and giving the online students the opportunities to reassess because of the logistical issues with reassessment, and also because of how easy it is to find online calculators that will do Calculus 2 problems. And in my online elementary statistics class, I was primarily using resources provided to me by a colleague. He's wonderfully talented at statistics especially. Like, he's one of our statistics experts, or I would consider him to be a statistics expert at TCC. His name is James Lively. And I was using James's exams in my online elementary statistics course in spring of 2020. So I've got 2 courses online, and I was teaching 3 courses face-to-face. One was an honors analytic geometry and calculus 1 class, and the other 2 were 2 sections of online, or 2 sections of face-to-face analytic geometry and calculus 3. I love calculus 3. It was new teaching this honors class. I was using Stephen Strogat's book as a supplement for the honors class as well. But these students were all expecting standards-based grading. So they were expecting the opportunity to retake individual standards. They were expecting to have individual quizzes, and then a pandemic happened. Excuse me. But before we get to that, let's just talk about January 2020. Here's some context for you and the environment that I was working in at the time. So first of all, you should know that at this time in January of 2020, I had been experiencing some online harassment and cyberbullying related to my professional competence. A lot of people were saying that I couldn't add and that I couldn't spell. and that I was basically incapable of doing my job. Um, I could sense it based on the way that people were treating me, based on the types of jokes people were making. It seemed that they thought they were quoting me as they talked about inability to add small numbers or multiply small numbers or work with fractions and all of these things. Obviously, I can do all of those things. I'm a math professor and I teach calculus. Um, but there was some misinformation going around at the time. And while I felt a little bit defensive and sort of my ego flared up because I take pride in the fact that I'm an intelligent person and that I'm good at math. Uh, I wanted to address that because it seemed that there was like a viral phenomenon of someone saying something really nasty and inaccurate about me and my qualifications. So that was going on. It had been going on for years, at least since 2017 or so. Um, and at the same time, like unrelated to that, I wanted to offer more and better resources for my students. I've always wanted to offer more and better resources for my students. So I teach, Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, differential equations. I had recently begun teaching elementary statistics, and I also taught pre-calculus 1. And occasionally I would teach pre-calculus 2, but it's been a really long time since I taught pre-calculus 2, also known as trig. And the essentials for pre-calculus class. And I'm very aware of the fact that part of the reason my calculus 3 students suffer or struggle with calculus 3 material is because they don't know how to take a derivative or antiderivative from calculus 1 or calculus 2. The same thing is true with my differential equation students. They sometimes struggle finishing a problem because they struggle with the algebraic manipulation. They struggle getting the differential equation into an appropriate form. And they also can't take derivatives efficiently or antiderivatives efficiently. At one point, I had a class where 20% of my class didn't know the antiderivative of 5. This was a calculus 2 class, and you'd think that a few weeks into class, they would know that the antiderivative of a constant is the constant times the variable plus c, and they didn't know it. But I say all of that to say that I wanted to offer more and better resources for my students. I was updating these Blackboard sites all the time with a prerequisite review content folder. But in that prerequisite review content folder, I was trying to keep them updated from semester to semester as I'm copying that folder over from course to course. And it was difficult to keep it updated with the most recent material. And I was having to do that for individual courses. I was having to duplicate my work. And I thought, well, how nice would it be if all of these resources were available in one location? So I wanted to solve that problem. I also wanted to make my course resources free. I wanted everything to be well aligned. So I want the lectures to be aligned with the activities, and I want the activities and the lectures to be aligned with the assessments. And I also wanted everything to be ADA compliant, because it should not matter if you have some kind of disability. You should have the same access to course resources and the opportunity to learn as everyone else. I want every student to have that experience, to have that positive educational experience. Every student deserves it, even if they are a small proportion of the students that we serve. So I wanted to make the course resources that I have free, well aligned, and ADA compliant, so that every student could have the same opportunities. And I had done some recent professional development. This was a couple of years old, a semester and a half old, I guess, or a year and a half old, I guess. In fall 2018, I went to the TCC Design Institute, which was really about creating student-centered courses and a student-centered syllabus. And the syllabus was, of course, related to a course redesign. So I did that, and I had gone through online course developer training. Now, because of the requirements and the grading and all of the work that I was doing for my standards-based grading courses, I had started and not finished the online course developer training many times. So I had gone through that content and gone over that content and gone over that content again and again and again, and continually revamped and revised and tweaked and improved my materials, typically for Calculus 2 or Calculus 3. And then finally, I finished it after, I think, 3 or 4 times of taking the online course developer training. But I had really been through that material a lot. I was very familiar with what they were trying to get us to do and the alignment between the online course developer training and the Quality Matters rubric, the Quality Matters training. So I had the Quality Matters online course developer training framework in my mind. I also had the Design Institute student-centered learning approach in my mind and the redesigns associated with that. And because of what I had learned about Quality Matters from the online course developer training, I was doing a lot of self-reviews for my online courses on the Quality Matters website. So I was really just checking boxes and making sure that I did all of the things that Quality Matters said a person should do a course design, or I was making sure that my courses were designed in such a way that it aligned with the Quality Matters rubric. So I was doing that for all of my courses, especially my statistics course, because I wanted to give my students that experience that was based on what we know to be best practices in online education. And also face-to-face education. So I have all of this, this recent professional development in my mind, the cyber harassment, cyberbullying that I was experiencing, where people were basically saying I was incompetent, and a desire to offer more and better resources for my students, and a desire to make all the resources free and aligned and ADA compliant. And I was like, I think I can address the harassment and the cyberbullying, and I can provide resources, and I can apply everything that I've learned in all of this recent professional development if I make my materials available online. So that's what I decided to do. And this is really what it's based on. It's based on this idea, like I'm quoting myself. Forgive me if that seems arrogant. I'm like, even looking at my like self quote, I'm like, oh man, I don't know if that was a good choice there. But this is what it's based on. This idea that online students deserve the same education that our face-to-face students experience. Before I started my redesigns a few years ago, my online students were not getting the same education that my face-to-face students were getting. I was able to check off all the boxes. I was able to make sure that every lesson had a formative assessment and then a summative assessment. But just checking off the boxes wasn't enough to create a design that really served my students in their needs. The students weren't getting the same interaction, student to student interaction, faculty to student interaction. They weren't getting the same content interaction as the students that were seeing a lecture face to face. And I noticed just huge differences in the performance of my online students and my face-to-face students when I looked at the quality of their work, at least years ago. I mean, around 2014, 2015, before I started all of my redesign work, when I looked at my online students' exams and my face-to-face students' quizzes, my face-to-face students had a lot of skills, and there was a lot that I could work with and a lot of just little tweaks that I could give them so that they could go from good to excellent. But my online students sometimes weren't even reaching that good bar. It's weird. I just like think of Mr. Goodbar, but anyway, they weren't reaching like the level of good sometimes. And that was unacceptable to me. So I was thinking, okay, well, how can I make the online experience just as good as what my students are getting face to face? And now that we've had this pandemic, I'm thinking, with all the technology that we have available, like we could make the online experience better than what our students experience to face. Our students experience issues with face-to-face learning because we have to differentiate, or we're trying to differentiate instruction while we have 24 students sitting in front of us at the same time, and all 24 of those students have slightly different needs. And that's difficult to do, but we could differentiate instruction at home really well. We could create immersive learning experiences so that the students aren't just reading textbooks and aren't just watching videos of lectures, and aren't just watching a Zoom lecture, which is live. There's so much that we could do to make the online experience as good as what students get face-to-face, if not better, but we hadn't done it yet. And even when we follow all the best practices in online education, what we were delivering to our online students was not comparable to what they were getting face to face, at least not my face to face students. My face to face students, I think, and I hope that this doesn't sound arrogant, but they were getting an excellent experience because everything was so well aligned, it was seamless. And the online students weren't getting the same thing. And I think that those online students deserve it too. And so the pandemic forced us to look at that differently. And that was the framework that I was coming from when I came up with some of these solutions. So my goal was, after all of this in January of 2020, to redesign my course materials for Online Calculus 2 and Online Calculus 3 for spring 2020. Now, I wanted to redesign everything, but I didn't have time to redesign everything in one semester. So my realistic goal for myself was to have all the videos done for Calculus 2 and Calculus 3 by the end of the spring 2020 semester. This was before the pandemic started. So in Online Calculus 2, which what I was teaching in spring 2020, I wanted to align the course materials for Online Calculus 2 to face-to-face standards-based grading Calculus 2, so that the learning outcomes were exactly the same from the online environment to the face-to-face environment. And that meant aligning all of the lesson plans and the activities, and making sure that the students were aware of the learning outcomes they would be responsible for on the exams. While they weren't able to take those piecemeal quizzes the way that my face-to-face standards-based grading students were, I could still, teach them the same content and provide them with the same resources for practice as my face-to-face students received. So I wanted to make online Calc 2, comparable to face-to-face Calc 2. I also wanted to create accessible course resources. And that was something that I had been working on for a number of years through the online course developer training. When I realized that all of my resources, all my PDFs, were not screen readable. And I thought about the students that wouldn't be able to access them or benefit from them. Well, first of all, I was overwhelmed because I had hundreds of documents per course. Well, to be fair, maybe about 150 documents per course, and I teach 7 courses regularly. And that's a lot of courses, a lot of documents to create and make accessible. Excuse me. But I wanted to start making those accessible. It was going to take a while, and I wanted to do one course at a time. So I wanted to create accessible course resources for Online Calculus 2, and that was something I had already started through the online course developer training. And then the rationale behind these goals was that, first of all, my online students deserve an equivalent learning experience to those that the face-to-face students have. The means may be different. We may not do it in exactly the same way because the online environment is different than the face-to-face environment. We have to adapt to the environment that we're in, but we could still create experiences that were based on the same principles and have the same goals for the students, still have the same like interpersonal goals, like social and emotional learning goals, what we would traditionally think of as soft skills goals in mind for those students. I wanted my online students to have that equivalent learning experience to what my face-to-face students were having. And then consistent with accessibility, I believe that all students deserve equal access. I was a little bit overwhelmed when I learned about how inaccessible all my resources were. So I started fixing them. I care about the one student who can't benefit from my course materials. Even if it's one, just one, that student deserves the same experience as everyone else. So I wanted to address that for all future students, for the students in my class this semester and for future semesters. And the third point is related to equity. I believe that equity means that every student, regardless of background, should have the support that they need to learn. Now, some students need more support than others. If you've ever seen that illustration with the students on a ladder, like some students have more privilege than others, and all the students are sort of climbing up a ladder. They're trying to learn. Well, some students have like a ladder where the rungs are broken. Like they can't even reach to the other side. It's ridiculous. So equity for me is about giving every student who has those gaps, and I don't think it's necessarily related to race or SES or any of that. Like all of us have areas of privilege and areas of lack of privilege in our backgrounds. When a student has a deficiency or a background issue that is making it hard for them to learn, that student deserves our support. And equity is about supporting them in whatever way is necessary for them to learn. Now, it might take them a while. They might not be able to get it done in one semester. But if we really care about them, we don't lower the bar. We give them the support that they need to reach a high bar. We give them that scaffolding. I believe that aligning my online Calc 2 to my face-to-face Calc 2 and creating accessible course resources and creating resources that for prerequisites that students can access at any time, that are easy to find and easy to search. All of that is consistent with creating an equitable learning experience for all of our students. So in online analytic geometry and calculus 2, I don't know why that 2 is red, but it is red. I made some changes. In spring of 2020, the lecture notes had been aligned to standards-based grading course standards. I created those in Microsoft Word. I made sure that they were ADA accessible so that a screen reader could read them, so that if a student needed a screen reader, those notes could be read to them. And I made all of the necessary changes so that any accessibility issues were addressed. Those were not new in spring 2020, but those were something that I had created over the past several years as I went through accessibility checks in the online course developer training a number of times. And then practice problems. So I had lecture notes to teach the students the material. I also had videos to teach the students the material. And then I had practice problems for the students to practice. Now in the face-to-face environment, it just consisted of PowerPoint slides. And that's what I put on my online courses as well. I just gave them the slides. I had all of those retyped and made ADA accessible. Before, some of the equations were saved as images and they weren't ADA accessible. So I had all of that remade, or when I say I had it remade, I mean I remade it so that those practice problems would be available as formative assessment for my students, so they could check themselves and see whether or not they understood the problems in the way that they were expected to understand them. And then if they got stuck on a problem, they were designed so that if you just click next and you look at the next slide, it'll tell you the next step in the process. So it was really just a series of slides with problems and answers, but they were broken up in such a way that the student could look at the question and then practice and then go forward through the slides and check their answer. And if they needed a little bit of extra help, they could always go ahead and look a little bit more forward through the slides to figure out what they were supposed to do next. I added conceptual questions to the Analytic Geometry and Calculus 2 online course. In the face-to-face course, I always give homework problems from the book as well as conceptual questions related to the concepts, related to the particular problems that they're working. Because I think it's really important that our students are able to articulate the concepts in their own words. As far as calculus is concerned, I don't want calculus or math to be like a monkey see, monkey do type of experience. It's not about watching somebody else do it and then copying, although there is a little bit of imitation involved. Like that's a lot of how we learn these things. But I didn't want students to just sort of do that mindlessly without understanding the concepts behind the math. I wanted them to understand what they were doing and why. So I added conceptual questions. And most of this had happened over the course of several years, not in spring 2020, but in the years before spring 2020, as I was learning more about creating excellent online courses through TCC's online course developer training and the Quality Matters rubric. And then I had recently changed my Calculus 2 exam structure to be very similar to the SBG quiz structure, except in the standards-based grading courses, they would have 3 quizzes that corresponded to the material on 1 exam in the online course. So, so basically, I was giving my students in the online course the same types of assessments that I was giving in my standards-based grading course. Unfortunately, the online students had to be assessed over that material all at once in a single exam, whereas the face-to-face students got to do it in individual quizzes. Now, the reason why I could not do the individual quizzes in the online course was because of just logistics and making sure that the students got all of those exams taken. And many students were often taking these exams at testing centers where they had to pay a fee. So I didn't want to give 7 to 10 quizzes in an online course when they had to pay $30 every single time they took a quiz. If you know, that's an extra $200, or sorry, if they're paying $30 per quiz, an extra $300 if there are 10 quizzes that semester. So I didn't want to do that to my online students. But this is all before the pandemic started. So I was keeping my exam structure similar to the face-to-face quiz structure, but I was putting all of the content on an exam as opposed to spreading the content out over 2 or 3 quizzes. And then this was the big one. In the beginning of spring 2020, I was working on lecture videos, both for Calculus 2 and for Calculus 3. And the Calculus 2 videos and Calculus 3 videos were aligned with my standards-based grading course standards. So everything was aligned. So the lecture went with what I was doing in class, and what we were doing in class was related to the practice that the students were doing in class. And now I was creating videos for the online class that were basically my lectures from the face-to-face class, but a little bit more fleshed out with perhaps more examples, so that students had more opportunities to see how problems were worked in the videos that would be posted on YouTube online. So that was Calc 2. Calc 3 was similar, but I was teaching a face-to-face Calc 3 at the time. But I was still thinking long-term, like I wanted to align my online Calculus 3 to my face-to-face Calculus 3. So, and I also wanted to create some accessible course resources. And I wanted my Calculus 3 students, the face-to-face students, to have access, to additional examples to the types of problems that we're working in class. In Calc 3, we often have to go over the big picture, and we have to focus on what these mathematical objects are and what these mathematical objects mean. And then we talk briefly about computation, but we don't have the time to sort of go step by step through various computations in class the way we could if we had plenty of time. So I wanted to make videos that were the lectures that I would give if there were no time constraints. Excuse me. So I was creating these optional video supplements aligned to the standards-based grading course standards for Calculus 3 at the beginning of spring 2020. And since I was teaching face-to-face rather than online, I wasn't too worried about creating typed ADA compliant versions of my notes yet, because students were primarily looking at hard copies of things. But I had planned for a future semester to type the answer keys to my lesson notes. Because right now, the versions of the answers to the lesson notes that I give to my students are scans of my handwritten work. They're pretty. I make them with Sharpies, and I draw beautiful pictures of graphs in three-dimensional space, surfaces, and curves. But those scans of handwritten work are not screen readable. And I wanted to do that, and I still want to do that as soon as possible, but I still haven't done it due to time constraints. And then the rationale for Calculus 3 is the same as for Calculus 2. I care about equity. I want all students to have access to the resources that they need to succeed in the class. Um, and that's really the big one. And I think that an online student should have the same opportunity for an excellent education that a face-to-face student does. Okay. So here are the changes that I planned for Calculus 3, which was being taught face-to-face in 2 sections with standards-based grading. So I needed to update all the lecture notes to reflect the new textbook. So I did that. I created these supplemental lecture videos to align with this SBG course standards. And those course standards were aligned with particular types of quiz problems. These are the lectures and examples I would provide if I wasn't limited, by the 1 hour and 50-minute time constraint. Okay, and then I actually had to do all this. So if I want to implement this plan, I had to, this is what I ended up doing. I created a website over winter break from fall 2019 to spring of 2020 with the course resources that I had for all of my courses. So it was primarily Calculus 2. It had my notes for Calculus 3. It had my worked example problems for differential equations. It didn't have much for Calculus 1. It didn't have notes for differential equations. It didn't have anything for statistics yet. But I created the overall design of the website over winter break. Eventually, all of my course materials will be there, and hopefully they'll be updated anytime there are mistakes. I find mistakes occasionally. All of the resources would be updated and posted there. And that's at sashatownsend.com. And I wanted it to be current. I wanted it to be an easily searchable resource so that if a student needed help with factoring, they could just go to the algebra page and get everything that they needed to get help with factoring. Or if a differential equation student needs to review U substitution, they can go to the Calc 1 page and get all the tools that they need, all the materials they need to review U substitution. Or if a calculus, if a differential equation student needs to review integration by parts, they can go back to Calculus 2 or partial fraction decomposition. So I wanted it all to be there for anyone who wanted to learn, and also for anyone who just wanted to teach themselves, to sort of prepare for a class, to sort of know what's coming, and then come take my class later if they wanted college credit. And I wanted that website to include both course materials and review materials, as I've just discussed. And I wanted it to include materials for all the courses that I teach. That's not quite done yet. I teach a lot of courses, but Calc 2 is up. Calc 3 is up with the materials that have not been revised to the notes are not yet ADA compliant. Some of the differential equations notes are up, the videos are there. All of the statistics PowerPoint slides and statistics videos and homework help videos are available. And I've even started creating course materials for a course in algebraic geometry, and that's there. That's all online right now, and eventually I want to put something up there about vortex statics in my research as well. I'll have to get to that after I take care of everything else. So I created that website over winter break before spring 2020, and I started making videos. I purchased a document camera on Amazon. I bought a bunch of Sharpies. I bought a bunch of highlighters, and I started sitting at my dining room table like I am now, and using white computer paper and just drawing pictures of curves and talking about definitions and talking about these mathematical objects and what they represent and how we can work with them, just all the beautiful consequences of our assumptions. So after getting all those materials together, I began recording lecture videos for Calculus 2 and Calculus 3. And this was my vision. I wanted the course and review materials to be free, searchable, and easy to use. And I wanted to share them with the world. And I didn't think it should just be my stuff. I thought it should be anybody's materials from TCC or anywhere. We are all creating this stuff now because of the pandemic. We're making videos, we're making notes, we're doing all of this so that our students can work at home. Why not give it away for free? we've already made it. There's no reason not to give it away for free. So I keep thinking of it as TCC open courseware. Okay, so all of that happened. My calculus, honors calculus 1 students and my calculus 3 students in 2 sections are expecting standards-based grading, and I'm still working on all the redesign for the online courses as well. And then we had a pandemic happen. There were people that were getting sick just before spring break. And then we found out during spring break that our spring break was going to be 2 weeks long, and that when we came back, all the classes were going to be online. And I did not take a break in March 2020. I just kept working and working and working, trying to make all of the videos and notes and pivot in all the ways that were necessary in order to suddenly teach 5 classes online as opposed to teaching 2 classes online and 3 face-to-face. The most important thing to me in this was doing the best I could to honor my commitments to my students. Now they know that it was hard. I made promises in the syllabus that were based on the circumstances that we were in, and things had to change a little bit. And creating all of those lecture videos now for Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and Calculus 3, that was a lot. I was originally only planning to do 2 courses in spring 2020, and then I was suddenly doing 3. But this is how I attempted to honor my commitments to my students after the pandemic started. First, I was teaching online elementary statistics, and that did not change very much at all. I didn't make any new changes for spring 2020. I was using the online homework, my lab math for the statistics materials. I made huge changes in fall 2020. I made, I revised every PowerPoint, every slide deck, every PowerPoint slides file. I changed all of those, and then I made videos for all of those, and I worked every single homework problem that I assigned and created homework help videos to go with that as well for statistics. But I didn't do that until fall of 2020. So in spring of 2020, there were no new changes. At that point, I was having my students read the book. I was telling them, here is a list of topics that you should be prepared for on your exams. Here are some practice problems in the MyLab Math, and they had multiple choice tests. They were submitting their work on a Scantron. A colleague gave me his exams. He was sharing those with me. And the one change that we made was to write new exams. Students had already taken the first 2 exams in the testing center, but the 3rd exam and the 4th exam, they were going to have to take at home. And I didn't want to use my colleagues' exams for the online exams because I didn't really feel like that would be fair to him if all of his questions got out and he felt like he couldn't reuse them. And I also noticed when I started searching for the publisher exam questions, I'd just type them into a search box online to search, via Google or DuckDuckGo or something like that. And I would just type the problem statement. I hit enter. Yahoo Answers would pop up and it would say the answer is B, the answer is D, the answer is A. And I mean, every exam question that I searched for could immediately be found on Google just by typing the question into Google. And I was like, okay, we can't do that. We can't give an online or a take-home exam in a statistics class where every single answer can be found just by typing in the question on Google and somebody will give you the answer back. So what we did was we created entirely new exams for exams 3 and 4, very similar to the originals, but we just changed, changed the Z-scores, changed some of the numbers, but tried to make it comparable to what the students would have done on the other exams. So there wasn't a huge redesign here, at least not in my online elementary statistics class until fall of 2020. And then in online calculus 2, I'm still using a traditional structure in online calculus 2, but I'm trying to improve the alignment between online calculus 2 and the face-to-face calculus 2. Here, I gave long take-home exams with more difficult problems. Those were replacing the paper-based timed, I have quizzes written there, they're replacing timed paper-based exams. I was continuing to create the lecture videos. I was also working on notes that semester. I didn't get to finish the notes because I was having to make lecture videos for Calc 1, Calc 2, and Calc 3 all of a sudden, and just there, and new quizzes and all kinds of things were happening because of the transition to online or remote instruction. So I wasn't able to continue the notes at the very end of the semester, but I was continuing the creation of the lecture videos for Calculus 2. Now, my Calculus 1 students and my Calculus 3 students were promised that they would have the opportunity to reassess over approximately 30 course standards per course. And I don't remember the exact percentage. I suppose I could look it up if I wanted to. But the course standards were to comprise 75 to 80% of their grades in these classes. And they had already assessed and reassessed on many standards, but there were quite a few standards for them to reassess on over or after spring break. So I had to do something about that. I promised them this, and I didn't want to shift suddenly to a number of paper-based exams that they were taking over the weekend, like my online Calculus 2 students were doing. I wanted to give them standards-based grading, even if it was in a modified form, a form modified for the online environment. So this is what I tried to do. With my honors analytic geometry and Calculus 1 class, which was formerly face-to-face with standards-based grading, I started creating the lecture videos. I was not planning to do that. So there are only 41 lecture videos for Calculus 1. And honestly, they were a little rushed. I was just trying to get the lecture videos out at the end of the semester there. The students were still doing paper-based homework because I was only asking or always had my face-to-face students do paper-based homework only. While the online homework platforms are great as far as giving the students feedback that they're right or that they're wrong, sometimes the feedback that they give them in other ways is not feedback that I would want them to have. Sometimes the advice for how to solve the problem isn't very good advice, or it's just a very different way from the way I'm teaching it, and it confuses the students to see both ways. So I found it better for my students to just give them paper-based homework and give them the answers myself so that they can check their work against the answers, but not the full solution. So if they don't get the answers that they're supposed to get, they know to come to me and ask for help. And in Calculus 3, I was continuing to create the lecture videos. Fortunately, I was already creating lecture videos for Calculus 3 in spring 2020, and we still had the paper-based homework there. Now, see my cup, one of my students gave this to me. I'll have to show you in a little bit. We still had quizzes, standards-based grading quizzes that I wanted to give in these courses, Calc 1 and Calc 3. So suddenly I needed to write a bunch of online quizzes. So I started writing online quizzes for individual course standards in WebAssign for Calc 1 and MyLab Math for Calc 3. TCC happened to be facing in a new textbook. So the Calc 3 students were using the old textbook. The Calc 1 students were starting to use the new textbook. So we had two different online homework platforms for these two different courses. And I created online quizzes for all of the course standards in both courses. So quizzes were available for every course standard in Calculus 1 and Calculus 3. Every student was given 4 attempts to submit their quiz, so 4 opportunities to try again if they got the problems wrong. And then I had a policy change. Before the pandemic, the students knew that their most recent score would stand. So it was not in their best interest to retake a quiz or take a reassessment quiz unless they had really studied the material and learned that material. The idea was they were supposed to wait until they got feedback from me, read that feedback, learn from the feedback, practice, and then take another quiz when they were ready. And then hopefully their new quiz score would be better than their old quiz score. And as long as they remembered that and they kept that in mind, their scores tended to go up. But now that we were doing online quizzes and I wasn't able to give them that detailed feedback, the students were having to self-assess whether they needed feedback, whether they needed help and support. So we had to talk about that. I told them that in this online environment, it's more important than ever that they reach out and they're proactive about their education. But I also didn't want to penalize somebody for a sign error or something like that when they really understood the concept. But I was also not able to personally grade um, all of these quizzes for all of these students. So I think in one of these courses, they had 25 quizzes. If they have 4 attempts to submit, that turned out to be about 100 quizzes. There was no way that I could grade 100 quizzes myself per student or up to 100 quizzes per student. So suddenly they're not getting the feedback that they used to get. And they were getting a lot of good feedback about once a week from me. Now their work is being graded for accuracy. It has to be exactly right. If it's not exactly right, they don't get credit. Now, sometimes if they were missing a comma or something like that, if there was a typesetting issue, I would always go in and be happy to assign the appropriate number of points for an issue like that. But I couldn't go and grade the individual work for those 100 quizzes per student or 120 quizzes per student. It just wasn't possible or feasible, especially with all the videos that I was having to make and the quizzes that I was having to write for both of these classes. So the students were not getting feedback. They were now being graded for accuracy. So I said, okay, well, what's the best thing I can do? Well, before it wasn't open notes. Now it's open notes, open book. They have access to all of their resources, but they're being graded for accuracy. It has to be perfect and they're not getting feedback. So I'm like, so how can I balance that out? The way I tried to balance that was to say that the highest score would now stand. So there was no downside to trying again, except for that you were wasting a chance if you were not ready to take that quiz. And then they could take the quiz up to 4 times and the highest score would count toward their grade in the course. Okay, so at the end of spring 2021, here are some outcomes. Or at least for my course design, what my outcomes are. These are not my student outcomes, but the outcomes of my work for spring of 2021. At the end of spring of 2021, I had 108 videos for Calculus 3. I was sick for a few days in early April of 2020. I don't know if I had the coronavirus. I know that I was sick and I felt very sick, and then I was suddenly fine. So I'm going to have to remake those videos whenever I have time, probably this summer. But at the end of spring 2021, I had created 108 videos that I could use in future Calculus 3 courses from now on, which was an achievement, which was very nice, which means that I can focus on my students as opposed to that content creation that I was doing in spring of, I said spring of 2021. This is spring of 2020. There we go. And then I also had a complete set of videos for Calculus 2 at the end of that semester. There were 113 videos. And then I had an incomplete set of videos for Calculus 1. I think I'm going to remake those entirely. There are 41 videos there. There are some errors. Again, I was making these sort of on the fly, very fast. Since January of 2020, I have created videos for Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, differential equations, statistics. I made some videos for algebraic geometry and linear algebra as well. And there are about 830 videos on my website right now, or on the YouTube channel right now. And my website has notes for Calculus 1, a little bit of note, a few notes for Calculus 1 for that first unit in Calculus 1. I was unable to finish those because of the pandemic, like everything changed. And so I didn't have the time anymore to work on those notes. But I've got some notes for Calculus 1 online. I've got Calculus 2 notes online, most of the notes for Calculus 2. All the notes for Calculus 3, although there are some errors, I need to replace some files there. Some worked example problems for differential equations, notes for algebraic geometry, and all of that is on the website right now. So it's getting there. Eventually, all those resources will be available and they'll be free. And any student who wants to review will be able to go to the website and get what they need to review. I'm really proud of it. But even as I've created all of this, I'm very much aware that my online students are not getting the same experience, still not getting the same experience as my face-to-face students used to get using standards-based grading, as described in the last video. Here's a big reflection, probably an obvious reflection, but a big reflection, big conclusion that I came to was that the online quizzes where the students are not getting the feedback that they used to get and they have to be accurate, these are not interchangeable with the paper-based quizzes. When I write a paper-based quiz that covers concepts and computation and is very similar to the lectures and is very similar to the practice problems, and that alignment is tight so that everything is just a seamless experience, and then I try to recreate that with publisher problems and the constraints of the publisher's quizzes and the way that they do quizzes on the publisher platforms, the students are not getting the same learning experience that they were getting from the paper-based quizzes. The paper-based quizzes were really assessing what I had intended to assess, providing feedback, and then giving the opportunity to reassess. With the online quizzes, it's covering the same concepts or the same topics, but the lack of feedback and the what was I going to say? The lack of feedback and the need to be accurate, to have a perfect answer in order for the student to get credit. That's a very different experience from what my students were getting face to face. It's more focused on like the outcome, the thing that the student writes at the end, and not so much focused on the student's understanding. And then that content creation that I was doing where I made all those hundreds of videos, as I'm making the notes and the videos and the Blackboard sites and I'm trying to get all of that done, I'm not able to spend as much time attending to my students and their needs. If that's all finished, then I can focus on grading and content delivery and checking in with them and giving them grade updates and things like that. Content creation does take away from all of that. I had some students in Calculus 3 that were very upset one week because their videos for the week didn't come out until Thursday or Friday of that week. And they were wondering why. They're like, why aren't the videos there? And I said, because I was making videos for Calculus 1 and Calculus 2, and I'm rotating. I'm like, Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3 this week. You guys were at the end of the week. I'm sorry. Just the practicality or the practical requirements of making 108 videos for one class and 113 videos for another and 41 videos for another, and then corresponding notes and Blackboard sites and corresponding quizzes. And then getting the homework that they were submitting, the paper-based homework they were submitting via email, downloading all those files, and then just scanning through them, just looking through them and grading for completion. It just took a lot of time. I would typically grade those homework assignments for completion in class, and it would take me no more than 15 minutes. Now it's taking me about 3 hours to download all those files and just scroll through and make sure that the student did the assignment the way that they were supposed to. There are a lot of issues in spring 2020. It didn't not go nearly as well as I would have liked, but fortunately I had the document camera. Fortunately, I was already making videos. Like, I was ready to just step in to teaching online in that online environment. But man, it was still tough for these reasons. It's not comparable yet. It can be comparable. And I think it can be better than comparable. I think online learning can be amazing if we really take advantage of the technology that's available. But it hasn't been designed yet that way. And even when we follow best practices with Quality Matters and the online course developer training, we're still not delivering at least the same experience that my students were getting in the face-to-face standards-based grading style course. So with planning for the future, one of the things that I love to do at the end of every semester is debrief with my students. So I will send emails to a few of my best students and say, hey, I'm meeting with some students, Thursday after finals week. If you're available, would you, come to our Zoom meeting and give me some feedback on the course? And I use their feedback to design the course for the following semester. And of course, I read the feedback on the student evaluations as well. Student feedback is really important to me, but I always ask my students to make it actionable, because if they say, I like the course or I don't like the course, it's nice to know that they like it. It's kind of sad to know that they don't like it, but if they don't give me anything actionable, I can't do anything to make it better for future students. So I ask them about homework, I ask them about quizzes, I ask them about things that I could possibly do differently. So we talk about that during our debrief sessions after the semester is over. And then here, I've got 3 questions here that I'm contemplating and thinking about and wanting to brainstorm with my colleagues about as I plan for the future. And this was at the end of spring 2020, but also as we go into 2021 and 2022, we have to do something better when it comes to online math education. Before the pandemic, we would say, or I would often hear colleagues say, that online is the next best thing to face-to-face. And some students need online, and it's a very good thing that we have online for the students that need it, but it would probably be better for them if they came in face-to-face. And I don't think that's true for every student, but I think it's true for a lot of students. But if everybody has to learn online, as you know, we have been thrown into this great experiment and everybody did have to learn online, the question is, how can we better provide online math education for our students? How can we provide our online math students opportunities to learn from their mistakes, opportunities to reassess? Ideally, they'd be able to take a quiz online and get personalized, detailed feedback, the same types of feedback that a live grader, a person grading their work, would give them. And I think that's going to involve some artificial intelligence, honestly. The feedback that WebAssign and MyLab Math and other publisher platforms are giving our students now is good. It's better than nothing, but it's often like, you're right or you're wrong, or you're right or you're wrong, and maybe you should read this part of the textbook, or you should read this example. But nobody is going in and saying, oh, you said that the square root of a squared plus b squared was a plus b, but you can't do that. Nobody is saying, you know, you're missing a dx there. Oh, you inverted your u and your dv, and that's why your integration by parts didn't work. Or the antiderivative of natural log of x is not 1 over x. The derivative of natural log of x is 1 over x. Like there's no human grader providing that type of feedback. But if we had artificial intelligence providing that type of feedback, where software was actually giving the students the feedback that a live grader would give them, oh my goodness, that would make our lives so much easier. So that might be a way in the future for our students to learn, to get that immediate feedback, but also have it be the same quality of feedback that they would get maybe a week later from a professor. So the issue is not that we're unable to give our online students quizzes that they can take over and over, because they can, but it's the ability to provide that quality feedback in a timely manner. The online homework platforms provide timely feedback, but it's not the high quality feedback that the students would get from a person. If we could get timely feedback that was the same quality or better quality than what the students could get from a person, a human grader like myself, a subject matter expert who knows calculus and knows what the students are supposed to do, that would make all of our lives so much easier, and faculty could focus on other things like making fantastic simulations and immersive learning experiences for our students. So that's my first question, is how can we provide opportunities for the students to assess and reassess and learn from mistakes. And when I say learn from mistakes, that means getting some feedback that's worthwhile and being able to improve based on that feedback. Another question is, how can we provide better incentives for good study skills? I saw a grammatical error. I changed that incentive to incentivize. How can we better incentivize good study skills? One of the things that standards-based grading does so well is that it encourages the students to study and to learn. And then when they learn, they feel good. And then because they felt good, then they go and study again. And then they do this again. And it's just this process. It's a cyclical, wonderful process where as they get higher and higher grades through studying, they study more and their grades go up, and they study more and their grades go up. And it feels really good to them to develop that confidence and learn. So the question is, if we're not able to recreate what we do with standards-based grading in the classroom, which is providing that incentive for the good study skills, what else could we do to provide that incentive? Students are interested in their grades. They also care about learning, but they're really interested in their grades. So one of the key components of SBG is that we tie grades to learning, so that in order to get the thing that the student wants, they have to learn. And then because of the pairing, it's almost Pavlovian, the learning and the grades start to go together for the students. How can we do that online? That's the question. Doesn't necessarily have to be standards-based grading, but how can we provide that kind of incentive structure where the students are studying and feeling really good about themselves and gaining confidence through an online experience? And then, consistent with the second question, how can we provide better feedback to online students? As opposed to saying, yes, you got it right, no, you got it wrong. How can we provide quality feedback? And I think that AI is going to have to be involved. We're going to have to design something that would give instant feedback the way the online homework platforms already do, but at the level of quality that they would get from a human grader. So let's look at these two questions now. When I think about online course design, I'm still thinking about standards-based grading online versus traditional grading, and I am 100% willing to abandon standards-based grading online if it doesn't work online. The question is, after spring 2020, I asked myself, can it be done well online? And if it can be done well, what does that look like? And so I had some redesign ideas that I applied in fall 2020 and spring 2021. So we're going to talk about those in the next video. And then the next question is, if we can't do standards-based grading online well, how can we create an online learning environment that achieves the same ends through different means? So what we want is the students to be able to focus on one piece at a time. We want the students to be able to organize their learning. We want the students to be able to assess, get feedback on their understanding, and then improve. And we want the grades to reflect that. All of that was done through SBG, and there were also natural learning communities that formed as students were working together and trying to improve. Like, the students became a member of a family. It is definitely a family environment where I am serving as that coach or the mentor who is sometimes giving tough love, often giving praise. But that we're all on the same team, and I'm sort of the one that guides the team to their own victory that they've earned themselves. The question is, how do you create that online? It sort of happened naturally face to face because of the structure. How do you create a structure online that produces the same results? So it really goes back to for me, to the research-based principles. I love this book, How Learning Works, by Susan Ambrose. And she talks about these 7 research-based principles, and then talks about what the research says about prior knowledge and organizing knowledge and motivating students. So here are the questions. She says, how does prior knowledge affect student learning? And we know it affects it in a number of ways. There are misconceptions that affect student learning, and there are gaps, things that the students don't know that affect student learning. So we need to address the misconceptions and fill in the gaps. For the second one, the question is, how does the way students organize knowledge affect their learning? Well, there is research related to that tells us how students tend to organize knowledge. We know that we need to help them organize knowledge, and when we help them organize it and make connections between ideas, that's always a good thing. if we break it into the right pieces and we help the students sort of create that framework. Standards-based grading does that pretty naturally. And then we talk about motivators. In my face-to-face class, human connection was a huge motivator. Of course, grades are a motivator, but the fact that grades are tied to learning means that learning is now a motivator. So we've got learning, grades, human connection, that sense of camaraderie, that sense of teamwork, that sense of family that happens in my classroom. All of that motivated my students to learn, especially when everyone around them is motivated to learn too. Then she talked about how students develop mastery, and they develop mastery using the approaches that we used with standards-based grading. What kinds of practice and feedback enhance learning, the types of cooperative learning that we did in the classroom, and the types of detailed personalized feedback that I gave my students, and the opportunity to revise. All of that enhanced learning. I'm giving my students the same practice problems in the online classes, but I don't know that they're using them in the same way. Those practice problems are the formative assessment that they're supposed to do at home, but they're not doing it with a classmate. So that's a different learning experience than it is when you're doing board work with your classmates, which is really fun. So there's that. And then we talk about student development and course climate. The climate in these courses is usually really positive. Occasionally it's negative and we have to sort of redirect and teach everybody growth mindset. But that course climate can be cultivated to help students benefit as much as possible from the grading system. And because they have the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and try again, they do become self-directed learners as they find out what works for them, what doesn't work for them. They find out the types of mistakes that they tend to make and they correct them. And then they find out that they make different mistakes and they correct those and they just get better and better. All of that happens with a face-to-face standards-based grading experience. The question now is not how to make standards-based grading work online. The question is how to include all of these things that address prior knowledge, organizing knowledge, motivating our students, helping them develop mastery, giving them the types of practice that they need, and the appropriate feedback to enhance learning, and then creating that sense of community and a student's personal development so that the student becomes a self-directed learner. How do we create that online? Those are the questions. So how can we correct deficiencies and misunderstandings in prior knowledge online? How can we help the students organize their learning online? That's usually just through excellent course design right now. If you use the Quality Matters rubric to judge your own online classes, if you have everything in modules, if you have everything in particular units with lessons, that's going to help your students organize their learning. But how do you do it in such a way that they're connecting ideas and not just going through a very linear lesson plan? Like there's something to be said about considering that question. How do we keep them motivated, especially when they can't see each other or they don't see each other often? My students tended to be motivated by human connection and understanding the material and understanding the grading system. When they understood that it was their hard work that was going to lead to their outcomes, the outcomes that they wanted, and that hard work was going to lead to learning, and that learning was going to lead to the grades they wanted. All of that sort of worked together to keep my students motivated. How do we do that online? How do we help students develop mastery online? How do we design interactive practice that is truly interactive when the students are online in a math class? And how do we provide personalized, timely feedback? And I really think software is the answer for that. I think we need AI that will give detailed, personalized feedback automatically. That would be amazing. It would save teachers so much time. And can you imagine what we could do with that data? It would teach us so much about what our students are experiencing. I mean, there's a lot there. And then how can we remove barriers to creating learning communities? These learning communities that my students formed in the math lab are not forming naturally in online classes. You know, a student can't just turn around and say, hey, you want to study after class, to a guy sitting behind him, because there's nobody sitting behind him. He's in his own living room, his own home. So that's not happening in the same way. And then The question is, how do we help the students become self-directed learners? Well, I would say in an online class, they're already self-directed learners, but they feel isolated often. And even as we give them all of these very linear lesson plans that show them exactly what to do and when they're supposed to do it, they're staring at a screen for a very long time by themselves. And it's not interactive enough. Even when we try to build in little knowledge checks and formative assessment, and we do all of the things that we're supposed to do according to Quality Matters and um, the online learning, our online course developer training at TCC, even as we do all of that, I don't think it's translating. It's not translating in the same way that it used to face to face. But I think we could do it online. There's absolutely no reason we couldn't do it online. We just haven't thought of it yet. So I'm hoping that by having more conversations with people from diverse backgrounds, from diverse fields, diverse domains, we can come up with some solutions that really work for our students. Because again, this is my quote again, online students deserve the same education that our face-to-face students experience. And I think that with the technology we have, we could create something so much better. We just haven't yet. We're not using the technology we have. We're not leveraging the technology we have the way we ought to in order to create that online learning experience that is truly comparable or if not better than what the students are getting face to face. We haven't done it yet, but there is no reason that we cannot do that in the future. So that's it for right now. Next time, the next video, I'll talk about how I implemented a standards-based grading in fall 2020 and spring 2021. Here's a preview for Calculus 3. I used online standards-based grading. The students learn through course videos. They have lesson notes, they have blank ones, and then they have completed ones where they can check their answers for formative assessment. And then they have web-assigned quizzes and corresponding homework assignments. But there are issues with that as far as the feedback is concerned. So we'll talk about that next time. And then in online differential equations and online live, that is a synchronous Zoom class of differential equations. My students will have Zoom lectures and they have supplemental videos. The online students are expected to watch the supplemental videos only, but they have the option to attend Zoom lectures. The online live students are expected to attend the Zoom lectures. And they have the option to watch the supplemental videos, but both groups are able to take advantage of both resources. In these classes, they had both online and written homework. For the first 2 units of the semester. For the last unit, it's only written homework. And they have paper-based quizzes. They're administered via Zoom or via honor lock proctoring or in the testing center. And they do have opportunities to reassess over those quizzes. But the reassessment experience in online and online live differential equations is different. It's actually kind of like an oral quiz. And the students make videos where they show me that they know how to solve certain types of math problems first. I watch the video, I give them feedback on the video. And then after I give them feedback on the video, they have the opportunity to solve a new problem. And I'm giving them their grade based on the new problem that they solve live with me. And they're just walking me step by step through their solution. And I offer them help and offer them support, coaching if they need it as they're working through that problem so that everybody gets through the problem during the reassessment quiz. But if they needed help, then they lose some points on that. Because if they were unable to evaluate, say, the 2 integrals in a separable differential equation problem, they couldn't get higher than a 1.5 on a paper-based quiz. So I think it's only fair that if they can't evaluate the integrals without help in an oral exam, an oral reassessment exam, that they also cannot get higher than a 1.5, which is, like a C- or a D+. And in fall 2020, I also redesigned online elementary statistics Quality Matters style. It was not standards-based grading, but I made sure to follow the Quality Matters rubric and tried to design a beautiful course following all the best practices for online education. But there is still again, some work to be done there, even when it's beautiful and easy to follow. And all of the videos and notes and everything are creating this seamless experience, or intended to be a seamless experience. There's still something missing from that educational experience that can be improved for future semesters. So that's it for right now. Next time we'll talk about all of that, um, with the logistics and challenges of online SBG in fall 2020 and spring 2021. There's an issue with the date there. That should be 2021. There we go.